right, let's finish this. Good. I guess I'm trying to think how I want to do this in more detail or not. So IP6, as we know, is enormous. Most of it is auto-configured by the sending host. You can just run a basic IP config, net IP address. I did one here. So or the IP config, and it will give you similar things here. So here we can see what it pulled, the IP address, what family it is, unicast as opposed to multi-broadcast, tells us the length or how long it will stay valid. This is one we're talking about now, ISOTAP. That's dealing with the routers and talking to other IP version 6 hosts. There's our IPv6, the loopback, the individual computer or IP address of this, and we are on London DC1. Yeah, yeah. No, you're good. No, I was just trying to get I didn't even pay attention to which one it was. All right, so when we do our PowerShell or our IP config, it's going to return the version 4 information and the version 6 information. Thank you. Okay, we also have the node types. When you hear the term node, what do you think of? Yeah, node, nude. Yeah, I usually think of it as an endpoint that is on the network. I guess it could be connecting in between. And in your book, they talk about the different node types. What we're basically dealing with is it IP4 only? Is it IP6 only? Is it a 6 to 4 or 4 to 6? In other words, is there compatibility with it? So, and as we are upgrading our network, this is going to tell us how or the way we would need to upgrade it. Do you have hosts or nodes that are IP4 only and IP6 only? Or are they configured to backward compatibility to work with both? Those are the basic nodes you need to think of. Basically, is it 6 only, 4 only, or is it 4 to 6, 6 to 4? Like they did with digital broadcast. Well, I remember there was a certain time where the local radio or TV stations were no longer broadcasting, only in HD. I have not heard of an actual timeline or time frame where this is the only thing left.
That would be hard for the whole net neutrality thing to be wasn't that part of the same stipulation that certain countries do however they wanted to do it?
Mm-hmm. Yep, dealing with the country codes, unique, how much control. I imagine China wants to, Russia, they want to control a lot of it through the government as opposed to the people. Yeah.
Well, when Chrome is created by the government, yeah. Everything goes to Google, just points back to China #1.
All right, so IP version 6 and 4. Who remembers how far back you started seeing IP6 addresses on your IP4 networks or computers?
Well, we got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember when it was out, and I remember like seeing it when we were like first network and playing games, but I didn't know what it was.
Sure.
Mostly on servers.
Mostly on servers. But we started seeing it when we would do an IP config if we had a new network card in it, or maybe a new wireless card. Depending on the technology, a lot of times you would start to see these really long numbers, and you had no clue what it was. Yeah. So I would say 10 plus years ago, we started seeing them on occasion, and throughout the last several period of time, we now see them on almost everything. At least being assigned to something on everything. We did talk about, so here we talk about them together. Remember, I guess it was a little while ago, we talked about how can IP6 go through an IP4 network, and it's called encapsulation. So IP6 can basically wrap itself with IP4 knowledge, go through that network, unwrapped on the other side, and then the IP6 can then unwrap or talk to the other side. We still have our reverse lookup. Again, we saw this. 4As in IP4, it's just our host on the public side. Let's see. Okay, so here's the packet. So IP6 and IP4 tunneling. So like we said, we've got our IP6 packet wrapped or encapsulated with IP4, so therefore it can go through. The router is going to then unwrap and pass on that IP6. So in this case, our router is doing a lot of work in taking those packets and stripping them down to the other protocol.
Now, when you do that, you mentioned that IP4 has a smaller payload than 6. So when it's going from IP4 to IP6 or vice versa, do you lose data doing that? Or is it just send 2 from IP4?
No, but there's gonna be more work for IP4 to break them down into smaller chunks. Yeah, it'd be cool if you bigger packet, wrap it in a smaller packet, go through some sort of a you could probably go through some sort of a compression piece and it would work, but we're doing way too much work, or it would be doing way too much work at that point. IP4, IP6, are realizing that certain layers of the OSI model are going to be dealing more with IP6 or IP4 information. Header basically is the first point of contact or the first point of being sent. Based on the header information, those routers are going to know, do I pass it on? Do I pass it over here? Does it stay local? So once we're encapsulated, we have our IP4, IP6, and then we get into the upper, which would be the actual data. We talked about this just a little while ago. James brought it up. We talked about the ways that we can move, or at least migrate or transition. He used ISATAP and the Teredo. Okay, what is ISATAP? Or ISATAP? Okay. Where does it begin? Not necessarily. We can say that it's more of a dialect as opposed to a foreign language. It does allow us to go that IP4 over, IP6 over IP4. There's routers that have to support that particular dialect or language. And when it goes through and deals with ISATAP based on, let me go back, based on that header information, it's going to know what protocol it's using and therefore talk to it. So ISATAP, we have our ISATAP host, IP6, going through the IP4 only intranet. The router is then going to take that particular communication, let's see, that host record, and it's going to pass it on. When the IP4 address, when the ISATAP router configures that, it is almost always going to have part of the actual IP4 address inside of it. So we can see here that it's a 192.168.137.133. So that's private. And then the 131 would be their public IP address. So that public IP address is also going to be unique based on the IP6 and migrating that, or at least putting that with IP4.
So is that the only place that the 96 address like that will have the IP4?
When you get into the routing protocols, yes. That I'm aware of.
Right, but I mean as far as what we're covering.
Yeah. So another one we talked about, or at least mentioned briefly, was the 6-to-4. It's not a real stretch to see you're talking about IP6 going to IP4. This is what allows us to use IP6 in an IP4 network. Again, hosts, and the big issue here is we do not want to use 6-to-4 when we have NAT, network address translation. We also talked, so in this case it's our router. So we can go into our 2012 router. If it had 2 NICs, we could configure it as a router, and then we would enable that 6-to-4 on that particular network. So the big thing here, in order to have IP6 working with IP4, again, the router is looking at the protocol, passing that on, and if there is a NAT service, a network address translation service, it will not work with that. Teredo, or Teredo, however you say it. More so. Teredo. There you go. I had to think for a second. In this case, you know that there is this service running on the network because you typically will have hardware that deals with it. So you have, yeah. A hardware that's running the service. So it could still be my 2012 server if it has it set up on it. It's something you have to add to it. It works with NAT.
So enables IPv6 connectivity, whereas the 6-4 does not.
Correct. Well, 6-to-4 does, but 6-to-4
But over IPv4 network, where
doesn't.
6-4 does not, doesn't it?
It's if you have a NAT server, the 6-to-4 will not work. That's the big. Otherwise, the communication is very similar. And where are we almost always going to have NAT, from going from my private network to my public. So that's where we're dealing with here. This is allowing packets to go from my private network through the router out into the public. You can also use your PowerShell, NetTeredo configuration. So the thing with Teredo is it works through NAT, which typically means it's going from a private network to the public. Okay? In 2012, 2012 server can be set up as a server, a client, and or a relay agent. And we talked about, remember the DHCP relay agent? And even earlier we talked about it tonight, like a proxy server. So we can use 2012 as a server, right? This Teredo server. It can also be a client in and of itself, or it can be the one that relays that back on the network. The other thing, when we're dealing with server 2012, we're talking a domain. So on the local network, it will be a member of a domain. So 2012, it can be configured as a client, server, or relay. It is by default going to be a client, and it has to be on a network that is running a domain. And if you have a NAT, network address translation service, going out to the internet, this one will work with it. 6 to 4 will not go through NAT, this one will. Any questions on a proxy? That's come up several times. Proxy, relay. If you look at the term itself, right, proxy means doing it on behalf of someone else. So in this case, we have a device, client, server, router that is taking IP and allowing IP6. When we talk about the node type, we have our IP6 only, and it can now have access to our IP4 only, as well as provide access between IP4 and IP6. So we're basically going either way. The proxy can handle that translation. That's going to be the router in between. So it can say, I have IP6 only hosts, can talk to IP4, and vice versa. What's the, and then when we talk limitations, TCP. So TCP as opposed to UDP. Correct. And the TCP transmission control, that. Correct. So when I'm talking to that particular device, I know that it's there and it's going to receive it. With a proxy, it's only TCP. So there's no broadcasting, there's no user datagram. So why would you put a proxy port or a port proxy on your network? You're migrating from one to the other, most likely from 4 to 6. And maybe you have new hosts or new computers that only run on one or the other, maybe based on the software they install. So you can put a port proxy in there and it will help manage it until probably such you don't use it anymore. So it's TCP only, and it's not going to address information. So when we talk about transitioning, this is the design part. This is where we put on our different hats. What kind of things do we have to make sure? Now, some of this is going to be, I guess, more common sense. What are the things that I'm going to need to do or make sure before I migrate to IP6? Applications, services, so software. Okay, what else? Hardware, and out of the hardware, what do you think would be the, where do you think would be the key devices that have to communicate? Yep. Switches dealing with VLANs and stuff. Routers are going to be the ones translating it back and forth. 6 to 4, Teredo. How is it going to go through and handle that? Or is it using its own? Or the other thing, migration. I'm going 4 to 6 now, but within a year, we're 6 only. So maybe you don't have to invest in certain things. You just need more of a Band-Aid until that time. So we have to make sure our devices support it. Our services support it, whether it's proprietary software, client operating systems. You also need DNS, and we do get it with 2012 R2. You have to have DNS records that can be compatible with IP6. So DNS is going to create not an A, well, it will still create an A record, but it's going to create the AAAA record compatible with IP6. And then, of course, the very end, once we know our routers, our services, our applications all support it, then we actually have to go through and if we have devices that are already IP6, we're good. If I have devices that are IP6, or sorry, IP4, IP6, we might be okay because they can translate it. IP4 only, we would have to at least upgrade or do something to make those work. The cost, if you don't do it right or you do it too quickly or you forget that so-and-so has a device that is not compatible, things don't work. Yes, services like that. Your RAS, if you're running the Windows WSUS, the update services, you want to make sure those types of things will handle your IP6. Questions? You're still probably not going to see it a lot in the real world. Let me change that. You will start to see IP6 information all the time, if you haven't already. You will not really have to work or migrate to IP6, especially internally, for some time. Publicly, if you were to go to an ISP, they may give you an IP address. In fact, they'll give you an IP address for 4, and you'll have an IP address for 6, so that those public DNS records can be found when they're searching for Kyle.com. The IP6 devices, the IP4 devices are going to find it on the internet. But we have to think, put on that other hat. All right. Did you do this lab already? Have you done this one? Have you done this one? What's that? Of it? Okay, why don't you finish that real quick, and then I'll get into 10. And the last couple chapters, if we need to... Is everybody taking the next class? Are you in the next one? Okay. Because we go into almost everything we've talked about, another layer of depth. So a lot of that stuff we talk about as well. So if I do speed through it now, I'm doing that because I know we're going to get to it again. Yeah. July, they're doing this track again. Sure. Who's your sales guy?
My sales guy? Scott.
He's the one that got...
As a matter of fact, I'm the person that suggested the person contact Bob.
Okay.
But I think probably this year we called someone today.
Yeah.
But I did tell him about Scott.
I have no problem with it if it's the same with James's friend, as long as it's not disruptive and taking away from the rest of you guys. If he has questions or wants to do with that afterwards, we can. But yeah, I think it would be great if he can come in and do that. But I'm okay as long as I would make sure Scott knows first. And if we need to, we can probably even print out at least one of the chapters we're covering, so he's got paper in front of him. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. He's got a few minutes to finish his. Uh-huh. Okay.
And there was a certain quote in there where there was really more AI talking to guys, and it was set like amount of time.
Okay. And what's it called again?
Columbus Day Expeditionary.
Okay.
And the AI is speaking to the main guy and he says, but you're not that smart. I mean, your species is responsible for Windows this time. And the guy's like, this time? That was a long time ago. He said, it's still an insult to computers across the galaxy.
Yes, it is. I would also put a Windows ME in there.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think Vista was that bad. I thought it was XP. I like Vista better than this.
XP Pro was good because it was one of the first client operating systems that or at least Windows-based, that actually was more business enterprise centric, as opposed to the old NT workstations. So the fact that you could deal with the domain and a lot of those different things, that's where XP Pro started to kind of separate itself. But overall, I still see,
No, Columbus Day Expeditionary Force.
have you ever read the Mistborn books?
No, but I was looking at that and I was kind of,
Brandon Sanderson?
I wasn't sure if I wanted to get those.
Awesome. My son told me to get them. I've read the first 6. Series of 3. Not that it matters, but Brandon Sanderson is a professor of literature down at Brigham Young University. But some of the stuff that he has written in these books, it actually takes it out to almost a universal type scope, dealing with all these, some time travelers and other things. And I'm not a big reader, but I read the first book in 4 days. I read the second and third within 2 weeks. And there was some twists towards the end of that just I was not expecting.
Yeah, this one is definitely adult.
Sure.
Not super adult, but it is pretty limited in a lot of areas.
This one will be very clean as far as the IMDb.
Well, I'm done. I mean, I apparently was on the very last one. Another quick quote from it. Says, want to have fun causing trouble? Go online and start a credible rumor that Justin Bieber and Darth Vader is next novel.
Yeah.
Franchise.
Yep. Plus, he's from Canada. Not that matters. He's a Canuck. You know what he's all about.
I don't know much about him. Good. Actually, I didn't think too much about trying to sell the movie at the time. Yeah, how they do with spine and stuff.
Yeah.
Right, it's 22 for the life or something.
And once you hit a certain age, you have to.
I mean, they kind of stole the idea of Rolls Ron, but
It was. That was a good one. I thought that was enjoyable, and not that I'm like an NSYNC person, but I think since Justin has gotten older, he's matured a lot, and his music has gotten better. Is he still here? James? Anybody see? Hello? you like the trailer for the new Han Solo? I w-
The whole success of movies will be based on how much people think that he actually could be the other Han Solo.
yeah.
I mean, some things don't do so well with stuff like that. Like the second, third Star Wars movie. Not watching them.
Yeah.
They kept a little blonde kid.
Instead of Christian Hayden.
Yeah. Men in Black 3 did really well. It's like, I don't know what the other actor's name is, but
I don't either.
it, it did a pretty good job with that.
Yeah.
Some of them not so much.
Yeah, it's I'm pretty easy. I like to be entertained. I like being surprised. It drives my wife nuts and my daughters, because I'll watch a movie and I pick up on what's going to happen very easily. I'm like, oh, he's dead. Oh, this is going to happen. Oh, this is going to happen. Have you seen it before? No. And then, yeah. If I like it where I get surprised. But I love the Han Solo character. I'm excited for the two I'm extremely excited for is Black Panther. The Marvel one comes out next weekend. And the Avengers Infinity War with Thanos. I think that will be, those two to me are going to be pretty exciting. There's a new, well, if you saw the Super Bowl, there's a new Mission Impossible. Yeah, there's a new Mission Impossible coming out this summer. The bad guy, I believe, is Henry Cavill, he plays Superman in the new DC Comics movies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the British guy
The one that got killed?
in Batman vs Superman. Oh,
Got killed?
yeah.
Huh.
Yep, he was also in Light of Day. That's good. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Did you see? That's one you'd have to see.
I think the only one that I've been to is
There is one part in Doctor Strange where he's going to a conference or a dinner party or something, and he's basically bored. He wants to find, a new case. What's interesting? And so the person on the other line talks about how there's a soldier who has had a spine trauma in a suit and needs to basically have his legs repaired or something. He's like, no, that's boring. Well, if you remember Civil War, at the very end, when Vision tried to shoot down Falcon, he missed and it hit War Machine and he fell into the ground. So in Doctor Strange, they're making reference about him actually going to the other Avenger, which is pretty cool. There's a few things like that. I'm easily entertained. I just, well, they've put it out, put them all together. Captain Marvel will be pretty cool. Yeah. Thor Ragnarok. That was good. Different universe, but I like Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah. Yeah. Basically a god. Yeah.
His character was just an avatar.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
actual being was the planet.
Mm-hmm. Ego.
Go back to what you talked about earlier about the Martian. You haven't read the second book that's come out,
Uh-uh.
Artemis.
talking about.
Well, Friday actually is like a courier getting a story, and they may have had one where, remember movie table like, you know, I can't remember the whole, but the one that starts out as an actual blonde and is weirdo.
One is Bridget Fonda, and the other is the other one is the girl from Breakfast Club, who's pretty quiet. Ali Sheedy, I think.
Bridget Fonda also has a role in a movie,
Which one?
and they series first. Anyway, not important. Anyway, Robert Heinlein's Friday starts out, you don't really know too much of the background, but there's a female courier, kind of a genetically engineered one. It kind of goes along with the Citizens of the Galaxy kind of a storyline.
Yeah.
Well, that's an excellent book.
Is it?
Probably one of the higher rated sci-fi books.
Which one?
Citizens of the Galaxy. That one starts off with a guy like a legless Vader or something like that. It's the first part of the thing. You find out later on he actually was some kind of a hero that lost his leg when a ship blew up after he saved, you know, like thousands of people that were trapped on the ship. Anyway,
Interesting.
What kind of movie was it?
I don't read a lot, but when I do, I like those. But traditionally, I've been into the Tom Clancy, Ludlum, those kind of books.
What about like fantasy?
I haven't gotten into a lot of it, except The Mistborn is a fantasy type, and I probably wouldn't have read that if my son and everybody else in the family hadn't read it and loved it. I did read a very interesting one that had to do with George Washington and some of the spies during that part of the war, and that was pretty interesting. And if I'm reading, it's usually
I'm not too much into fantasy. I got this one book, so the end of the seven, Dawn of Wonder, and it's long, 29 hours.
wow.
Excellent book. I gave it almost done with writing book two,
Wow.
and I can't wait for book two. It's so great. I told my son, and he was like, we've been down the last couple hours, and after he told me that he's still working on book two, he didn't want to finish the last 2 hours because he's like, no, I know it's gonna be wrapped in.
What was it called? Dawn of
Dawn of Wonder.
Wonder.
John, I think it's right. Great kind of like old.
Oh yeah. There's another big, and I can't remember what it is now, but there was a big sci-fi movie that an author was writing and passed away before he finished it. But anyway, it's been unfinished. I don't. But when I was talking with somebody else about it, and he was like, "Oh, that's one of the best books ever," type thing.
finally, top man. Freaking sweating over here. So dark. I was like dying on the
You got the
toilet. I was
coffee?
like, holy
You got the
cow.
coffee, man?
I was like, you know, I was looking to go today, but man, whew, like the hot in there, it's just me, man.
It's getting hot in here.
And I thought it was a bit strong, but you were
Where was
I don't know
the,
what you were doing in the bathroom. I thought you were taking slides in there.
where's the coffee pot?
You know,